And now it is certainly my honor to introduce to you our speakers this morning. Dr. Jeff Kaster is the director of the Youth and Theology Ministry program here at the School of Theology and Seminary, along with being an adjunct professor here at St. John's. He completed his bachelor's degree in English and secondary education, and also his master's in theology scripture right here from St. John's University, in addition to earning his doctorate in education at the University of Minnesota. And Ms. Poling is an associate director of the Youth and Ministry program here at St. John's. She has served as a lay ecclesial ministry for over 20 years in the Catholic Church. Her ministry focuses working with high school and college young adults. She holds a bachelor's degree in theology and psychology from the College of St. Ben's, and a master's in theology and pastoral ministry here from St. John's School of Theology. And most recently, she graduated in the first cohort of the Living School of Action and Contemplation from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kaster and Ms. Poling.
Good morning. Good morning. We're so glad you're here. The School of Theology just is so excited to have these mornings on Friday to talk theology. So we're glad you're here. Thank you for the warm introduction. Welcome Bishop Kettler, the first pastor who hired me as a youth minister. Father Greg Leeser is here. Students and current students and alums and co-workers and old friends and fellow parishioners. So welcome to all of you. So pretty good topic, huh? Who will have faith? So the outcomes for today, so by lunchtime, this is what Donelle and I hope will happen, that you'll reflect on your current relationship with Christ and the church. So this is meant to have some time for conversation, not simply Donelle and I giving you information. Gain understanding of the social, religious context in the United States. So what's happening? What's happening with faith? Gain insight into the new evangelization and the Synod on Youth and what the implications of the Synod on Youth for faith. Gain insights about faith and lessons learned from the Youth and Theology and Ministry program. So we've been having this kind of pilot experiment of engaging high school youth in theology, justice, service, and prayer, and we've learned some things about faith, and that's not just for youth, but that's, I think, for the whole church. And then basically the last outcome is a so what outcome. So we'll ask you and challenge you, is there anything that you'll do about this as you leave here? So actually theology and catechesis at the end has to lead to some action. So we'll just ask you. We won't have you write a contract or anything, but so that's where we're going. Okay, so who will have faith? Who will be Catholic? I want to start with, sometimes we conflate these two questions. So we'll talk about, and you know about all the nuns and all the people who are leaving the church. That's not the same as who will have faith, right? So faith and who's going to stay in the church are not exactly the same, but they're connected, right? So I want us to start by just imagining, when you hear the phrase, the question, who will have faith, are you thinking who's going to remain Catholic? Which is an important question. But there's another question of who will have faith. So I thought it would be good to just start with, what are we talking about? In faith, you can write books and books and books and books about a theology of faith, right? So here's the catechism. The invisible God, from the fullness of love, addresses humans as friends in order to invite and receive them into his company. So faith is the adequate response to this invitation. Come follow me. Faith is a response to that question from Jesus Christ. Right? So faith is grace, it's a gift. Faith is a human act. It's God's intention and it's a gift to us. So we go, why do some have faith and why don't some have faith? And we know that's kind of an enigma. If you have children, you probably, why do I have faith and why don't my children have faith? Or why does one child and not another? We know that it's a gift, but we also know that it's a human act. It's a step. It's a freely chosen act. I choose. I respond to this invitation. And this is what actually Pope Francis says I think is really helpful. Faith is born of an encounter with the living God. And I think this is going to be really important as we go through this morning. So faith is encounter with the living God. So, I mean, if we boil it all down for you, why are you here today? Why are you here this morning? And I suspect that for most of us, we're here because we've had an encounter with the living God, where we responded to that and said yes to that, and that's made all the difference in our lives. Okay? So I just start with that, and we could talk a lot more about what is faith. But I want to move into this really simple definition of leadership that I use a lot in my classes, and I just have, I think it's helpful. So if you would Google leadership, you'd come up with 1 billion different hits. That's how ubiquitous writing and thinking about leadership is. But this definition is actually one of the ones used most often and most quoted, especially in business and management. It's very simple. It says leadership is a process of influencing. So leadership is influencing individuals or groups towards accomplishing goals in a given situation. So I want to just highlight 3 things about this. In ministry today and in the new evangelization, this is all about leadership. It's all about leadership. So how are we influencing people to have faith? How is the church, the community of faith, influencing people to have faith? How are you influencing your children or grandchildren to have faith? Okay, but also what's important in this definition is to be clear about goals. What's the goal of faith? What is the new evangelization really seeking? And then the third one is, what's the context? So this definition says you have to understand where people are at before you develop strategies to reach a goal. All right? So if you think about the goal of faith and the goal of evangelization, is the goal, I want the person to remain Catholic? Is the goal, I want the person to believe in Jesus Christ and dedicate their lives to follow Jesus Christ? Or is it really both of those? Jesus, in the Gospels, really has this goal called the reign of God, which is so clear in the Lord's Prayer. You know, it's so clear. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy kingdom come. Where? On earth, as it is in heaven. So our mission as a Christian church is not just for the church. And I think this is actually pretty important. So often I think the Catholic Church wants to circle the wagons and say, let's get everyone back in the church. Versus how do we activate people to be the church for the world? Right? So this new evangelization is about that. And I think this definition helps us figure this out. What is going to work in Spicer might not work at Newman Center in St. Cloud or in Minneapolis or in New York City or San Francisco because the contexts are different. So part of this definition of leadership is to really be effective in this new evangelization, we need to be clear on our goals, we need to be clear on where people are at, and then we have to figure out some steps of influence along the way. And all those steps we have to evaluate and say, did this work or not, or whatever. I just think that's helpful. Okay. So part of the context for where American Catholicism is what's been happening in the church. So this is the New York Times, and it's from August 14th. And I'll just read it to you. Bishops and other leaders, this is the first paragraph and a half of the article. Bishops and other leaders of the Roman Catholic Church in Pennsylvania covered up child sexual abuse by more than 300 priests over a period of 70 years, persuading victims not to report the abuse and law enforcement not to investigate it, according to a searing report by the grand jury on Tuesday. The report, which covered 6 of the state's 8 Catholic dioceses and found more than 1,000 identifiable victims. So that's a huge part of the context of where we're at. So what Donelle and I thought we would do is we thought we'd start with some table discussion about that issue. I know some of you in some of your parishes have had discussions about this, but this is the 3rd time we've given this theology day, and most of the people who have come to these have said we have not had any discussion on this. Now, this is not about blame. It's just, what do you think and how do you feel? And has anything died in you? So I just invite you to just share with the people at your table or a group at your table to take a few minutes to have conversation about this, okay?
Okay. Hopefully you get a chance to share your thoughts and feelings. We're going to shift a little bit from using our mind only and move into using an experience or a prayer to lead us into deeper thought about the context of our talk today, or the context of the church. And I'm going to lead us in a prayer that reminds us that we're not the first to lament. We're not the first to grieve. We're not the first to have feelings around the events, the context, and the life of Jesus. And so I'm going to use a Ignatian imagination. How many of you have used this prayer form before? Okay, a few. And Ignatius believed that our imagination can lead us to thoughts, feelings, memories, and about a particular situation. And so he sets forth, he calls it contemplation, and you are to place yourself in the story of Jesus, or a scriptural story. And it's not meant to be you going back in time and placing yourself there, but what does Jesus reveal to us in this story for us to hear today? And so I will lead us through. I'll read one portion of the scripture. I will ask a question. There will be silence. I'll read a second portion, ask a question, silence, and then again a third, ask a question, silence. At the end of this, you will have an opportunity to discuss perhaps what you felt and what you saw, and again, placing yourself in the story. Please, this might be difficult for some. If you haven't done this before, be gentle with yourself, be kind, and just see what God is revealing to you as you are in this story. Okay, so let's get comfortable. If you are so inclined, you may close your eyes. And let us begin. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early, on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. What has died for you? They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is a place they laid him." What is your deepest hope? But go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. What is God calling you to do? What has died for you? What is your deepest hope? What is God calling you to do? I invite you to, as you were placing yourself in that story, reflect on those 3 questions, and if comfortable, share one thought with people around you at your table. Let's just spend a few moments doing that. Okay. We're going to gather our discussion to large group now. Does anybody feel moved or inspired by something that was said at their table that would like to share with the larger group? And any of those? Where's the tissue was the comment. Anybody like to share anything?
I'm not sure why it went down this road, but we get talking about this is actually the definition of evangelizing, where you pass on the good news, and then we're talking about the good news. It's not just the afterlife; it's good news for today. And then we get on to financially sharing and generosity and a lot of things.
Thank you. We'll talk about evangelization in a moment. Anyone else? Excuse my reach.
We talked a little bit about some of this is I talk too much, but I'm very shy. The death of thinking that ordained were somehow better, or like this clericalism that's talked about in many ways, but clericalism, and just the fact that we need to support one another and our pastors, but that doesn't mean that you just stick your head in the sand. That means that you have difficult dialogue in respectful ways. But that's hard. To the earlier thing, I'm not so sure that pastors know how to talk about this, quite frankly, as far as the stuff that we're all struggling with in the news. I don't think they even know how to talk about it.
Sister Michelle here.
Thanks. For me, that first question, what's died, and I appreciated it was asked twice from different vantage points. What came up for me was a certain death to naivete and denial. And my own personality is such that I focus on the glass half full rather than empty, and having to really grapple with the impact, and perhaps it's because I'm part of the Newman Parish in a very firsthand way. And what's occurred to me, particularly with young adults, how do we accompany each other in processing the grief? And socially, we're not very skilled at that. We tend to abort that process quite often and move on to the next activity. But this has a lot to do with how I can have a faith that is genuine and true and real in the midst of our human condition. And it's not either spiritualized or goes underground or I go away. So that's kind of what I'm pondering. How do I, in terms of action, accompany and be accompanied in that grief work to find a true, mature faith?
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments or concerns?
I have a I got more to say than that. I have to die. I tend to act alone, not in community. The women that went to the gravesite, they decided we better go back to town and tell this to some people, start communicating it. Most likely they were thinking, we got to have to do something. Maybe we have to listen to others. Maybe there's more to find out. So I think I would have to be dying to that, of how to act more in community with others. And part of that would be I have to instruct lay people who talk about what should we do with the priests. Because they should be asking themselves, what should we be doing? Oftentimes I hear complaints from the lay people. You can go to the parish council, but you can't do anything. And then they give up. They're acting alone like I do. They got to go home, find someone who agrees with them, go back to the council, and say, now we're 2 people. If that doesn't work, go 3 people. We'll get to the protest stage pretty soon, but but I do think that it's easy to say the priest should be this way or that way. I think it's time to say that the lay people should take up the strategy also. And this brings us up to, I think, a diocesan spirituality. I'm very appreciative that the Franciscans said, we have to develop our Franciscan spirituality and get back to the roots. And I think we diocesan people, by we diocesan people, that would be Mayuli, you would be religious, you would be diocesan, all the lay people here are diocesan, and you would be diocesan too, Bishop. We have to develop our diocesan spirituality. If we've taken on Poor Clare things, that does not lead us to action. Maybe we have to say our diocesan spirituality calls us to act together as a church. I would like to say to Dr. Kaster, you mentioned very important things. What is our context? Our context in the United States is we are the most powerful nation in the world. We got the most food in the world. And we let people starve at the border. This is affecting, I don't care what party you belong to, because our God is more powerful than all the bombs that we have in the world and all the money we have in the world. So it doesn't make any difference what party or nationality or color you belong to or gender. This is doing something to our conscience. We wonder why the young people aren't coming to church. I want the church to keep on growing. I heard a wonderful thing over here from the religious person saying, we have a wonderful church. We have to deal with that. Something in action. Otherwise, it's eroding, and our church will keep on imploding. Oh, I talked too much.
No, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate all the comments and all of the comments made at the small group tables as well. Jeff and I have been praying with this scripture since the time we've developed this in the summer. And we've found that each time that we come to this scripture in prayer, that it reveals something new and something deeper. And so we just offer this as a way for you to not only think about things, right, and that's important, but to also experiencing the living word in your own life, and to help you frame it in such a way that, you know, Mary at the tomb, I've often identified with her working 25 years in the church, saying, oh my God, what are we going to do now? What do I need to do now? And so we just offer this as a way in discussion. Sometimes it's hard to start those discussions and or even continue the discussions. And I just offer the invitation to use Scripture, to use prayer as a form of coming together and having these difficult discussions. And also finding some common hope in that as well. So Jeff's going to lead us next into the sociological data that can help us really flesh out some of the actual context as well. That's next.
Just a note about what's happened here and how we organize what's happened so far. Have you noticed that the majority of time was conversation amongst yourself at the tables? That's different than what typically happens. What typically happens is you have people like Donelle or I, or catechetical leaders or experts or whatever, let us tell you, let us give you information. And information is important. But there's also wisdom right here. And what we're trying to model pedagogically is to say, how do we establish time for honest conversation among adults, where there's some space for honesty, right, about how we're really doing and what's really going on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So how do we bring this back to your parishes to gather others, not with an agenda to say, oh, you must or whatever, but let's just talk about this. And I think there's something both that's healing and encouraging, even under talking about very difficult things. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt, but no one can know anyone else's feelings. And unless you touch the feelings of every single person, it will not be solved.
Right. So do you think that happens very often in parish settings?
Well, you use the word teaching,
Pedagogy, yeah?
and I did that for over 20 years. I understand being told, and I think being told is good. But as you say, there has to be a time, however it can happen, that the feelings of each individual is allowed to come forth.
Right. So 2 stories to start this next section, and then I'll go into some sociological data. So my oldest son, Stephen, is in 5th grade. He's at what was called St. Peter, Paul and Michael's SPPM school before it was All Saints Academy. And he comes home, and at the dinner table, he says this as a 5th grader, my teacher told me what I believe. And then he says something which I thought was pretty amazing, and he goes, Dad, isn't that something I have to figure out for myself? Isn't that interesting? That somehow, already as a 5th grader, he was thinking, I'm responsible, and there has to be some freedom here. The second story, Father Greg, you'll appreciate this. This is back in the St. Anthony's days. So we did, any of you part of the Renew groups? Yeah, so we had Renew neighborhood groups, and I was with my landlord, who was also either a trustee or one of the leaders. And he was a big guy, and I was just a new youth minister. And the question from Renew was, why are you Catholic? And we were all in the neighborhood talking about, why are you Catholic? And then this leader, he was getting kind of mad, and he wasn't saying anything, but he was turning red. So, we kind of knew, and this is so finally we're done, and it's like he starts pounding on the table. You know why I'm Catholic? You know why I'm really Catholic? Because my mama told me to be Catholic. And then he said something I'll never forget. Maybe I need to become Catholic for myself. And he was like 55 at the time. I was about 24. I thought he was ancient. Now he's a young man, You're laughing because you know. Right. Okay. So part of those two stories are all about, back to that goal of what does it mean to really own your faith and have faith. And we'll be talking about that before. We're going to go for a half hour and then we'll take a break. So just those of you that know what the clock is. Many of you know this. This is data about the church. And it's not so much data about so much faith, but it's connected. It's more about affiliation with the church. So the percentage of American adults who describe themselves as Christians has fallen nearly 8% in the last 7 years. This is from the Pew Research Center. So I don't know if you follow sociology or not, but that's a huge cultural shift in a very short amount of time. So people are saying, Christianity isn't working for me. I don't consider myself a Christian. So that does have something to do with faith. Ethnic and racial minorities now make up 41% of Catholics. The young Catholic Church is over 50% Latino. And notice that. Look at the room. Look at the room. What's wrong with this room? Right? Those describing their religious affiliation as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, increased by 19 million since 2007. There's more nuns than either Catholics or Mennonite Protestants, at nearly a fourth of the population. Saying, no, nothing, Christianity, not working. So, this is, again, from Pew, and 7 facts about American Catholics that I thought would just be interesting. The biggest thing is basically 1 to 7. Just remember 1 to 7. Okay, got it? 1 to 7. What do you think it is? What's the ratio? For every one person who comes into the Catholic Church, 6.57 leave. 1 to 7. So if we're thinking about, back to that leadership diagram, if we're thinking about how do we foster faith, and how do we evangelize, and how do we foster Catholicism, right? The context is, for every one that comes in, 7 are leaving. That's stark, isn't it? Okay, well, there's still, though, 51... No, that's leaving the church. Yeah. And of the ones who are leaving the church, you have 2 groups. Ones that are going to other denominations. So if you go to any other Protestant church in the diocese around here, you'll see a lot of former Catholics. But then you also have a huge subset of people who are just saying nothing. Okay? So there's a lot of Catholics. 2, Catholicism has experienced a greater net loss to religious switching than any other religious tradition in the U.S. 13% of U.S. adults are former Catholics. Okay? So I think part of who will have faith and who will belong is trying to figure out, well, what's going on? And a lot of times we think it's just young people, but it's not. It's not just young people. It's adults, it's elders, it's across the board. Yeah?
I was just going to ask, I've heard, and I don't know if I've ever seen
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I don't have exact data on that, but I do know you're right for sure on there's a equal, not quite equal, Catholics actually more are leaving Catholics than other denominations, but they're similar for other mainline denominations. Evangelicals, though, have been increasing, and American black Christian churches have also maintained and stayed the same.
I want to bring back the question now, and I'll probably be Googling it when I get back home. What about Muslim? What about Buddhist? What about other world religions? Is the same type of scenario happening?
No, it's not happening in the same way. I don't have the exact numbers on the top of my head, but there's not a diminishment for, I think American Muslim Church is actually growing. Buddhism, I think, is growing a little bit. But like Buddhism and Hinduism is such a small section that especially Pew doesn't get really good data on that. Yes?
Of that 1 in 7, can you estimate what percentage are going to another religion? Just an estimate.
Yeah, I think it's probably about 50%. 40-50%.
Okay.
Well, let's just do a poll right here. Those of you that have children and grandchildren. Okay, I did this. How many have left the church? You know, yeah, and so actually the last Theology Day I did this, and I actually took my family and my brothers and sisters and my wife's brothers and sisters and looked at all the grandchildren and came up with like 25% remained Catholic. And both my wife's family and I were super highly practicing Catholic families. And that, and then we did it at the tables, and we found that that was actually pretty similar for the Theology Day group too. Which means that this is not just data, this is personal. This is personal. Okay. Catholics in the U.S. are racially and ethnically diverse. That's really important. So one of the things that's striking me as I am about to retire is when we gather Catholics and in churches and in suburban churches, when I give talks, it's just about all white people. I mean, and it's like, that has to change. And I think we have to figure out how to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Catholics are dispersed around the country. Many U.S. Catholics say they want to see the church make significant changes. 6 in 10 say the church should allow priests to marry and allow women to become priests. Nearly half say the church should recognize marriages of gay and lesbian couples. Support for these kind of changes is lower, though still substantial among Catholics who attend Mass regularly than among those who attend Mass less often. And you should know from CARA, this is from Georgetown, about 24% of Catholics go to church every Sunday. So that's what's accelerating all of this. So as children are in families of occasionally practicing, going to church, like, how many, raise your hand if you grew up in a Catholic family that went to church every Sunday. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? And you're here. And you're trying to figure it out. What happens to those families where this is only occasional? So it's just accelerating. So 6, this is what I find interesting. Catholic split between Democrat and Republican. Just about evenly. So large majority of Catholics admire Pope Francis, but there's some growing resistance. Okay, a couple things, and this is just the young church. So there's been the largest study ever done on youth and parents, the National Study of Youth and Religion. They've been studying youth for 10, 15 years and tracking them. And so they started with young Catholics as teenagers who are now, 10 years later in their 20s, Christian Smith found that 50% have left in one decade. And this is one of his comments: if that number is not grim, I don't know what is. So I think we know this data is saying, hey, here's the context of it. Why? So this is old. So this is 10 years old. But of all the data, I really find this first comment, and I don't know if you can read it or not. Why did you leave Catholicism? For those who no longer affiliate with any religion, and it's like they just drifted away. So I've been thinking for a long time about what that means. And I coordinated confirmation for a number of years, and the funny thing is that for years for 35 years, we've been saying the same thing. Well, how do we keep young people after confirmation? The oldest joke is, like how do we get rid of bats in the bell tower of the church? So the parish council is talking about it, and then the pastor says, well, if we confirm them, you'll never see them again. Right? So, but I just think about this. What does it mean to gradually drift away? And I think, this is my opinion, I think it means that young people never really encountered Jesus Christ. Never really encountered the Holy Spirit. Never really had an experience of God where they said, I freely choose to try to follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ. Right? Yes?
Just to add to your comment, I have always used the word I internalized. I think, but my question really is, why is not mixed marriages in this? Because that's there for a lot of Catholics.
Right. That actually, it didn't make this chart, but you're right. That's part of it too, is that as more and more, like I grew up in a family where even considering marrying a Protestant was, you don't do that. Wow, are those days gone? And vice versa. Absolutely. Yeah.
What do those two columns say, Jeff? The red lettering up on...
Now affiliated, now Protestant.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, yeah. Now unaffiliated, now Protestant. Right. So I think when we talk about this new evangelization, and we will after the break, and what we can do here, and what we've been learning, there's this, what's the message about Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit? What's the method of providing space for children, youth, and adults and elders to have encounters with Jesus Christ? I mean, that's what we really need to be talking about. And there's all these programs that every year publishers come out with new programs if you do this and this and this. And you know what? They're not working real well. What always needs to happen is this is generated first and foremost in families. In families. Okay. So I was just on a panel last week down with the Catholic Community Foundation in Minneapolis, talking about this book, Going, Going, Gone. Any of you ever hear of this? St. Mary's Press. And they talked about young adults, millennials, and when asked at what age they no longer identified themselves as Catholics, 70% of the sample said between the ages of 10 and 20, with the median age being 13 years old, of the people who are leaving. So that really struck me. So I was listening to, John Vitek was on this panel. He's one of the authors of it with Kara out of Georgetown, and also Dr. McCarty. And this is what John Vitek said. He said, what happens at the early age is that there's a little chink that happens. So 13-year-olds come back and they've heard, women can't be priests. And they go, women can't be priests? Okay, I don't, that doesn't make sense to me. This is his explanation. What happens with children? Or they hear, about confession. They might have heard you must go to confession so often. And they go, oh, do I really need to go to confession? So a chink. And what he says is that those chinks become a crack, and then that crack becomes a fissure, and then they leave.
I feel though you have to bring in the technology of today, which is affecting our children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true. No arguing with that. So one last thing to really think about here, and then we'll move on. Those of you who have had me in class hear this all the time. Charles Taylor is a theologian and a philosopher, and he has this book called The Secular Age, which he has this main question he's been thinking about, and he writes this beautiful book about it. And the question is, how in 500 years did Western society change from a condition in which belief was the default option? Basically, the culture accepted that there was a God, and everything could be connected to God in some way, to where 500 years later, more and more people, unbelieving seems at first blush the only possible kind of option. In other words, how do we go from a culture that believed in God and God was part of everything to now where it's suspect? Suspect so much that if you were on an airplane and sitting next to someone, would you start a conversation about Jesus Christ? You're laughing. And the reason we're laughing is it indicates what's going on in the culture. Where do we talk about faith? Well, at places like this. Charles Taylor is saying, why are we uncomfortable outside of enclosed situations where we know we're comfortable to actually even talk about faith? It's an interesting question, isn't it?
Interesting. I chuckle when you talk about that conversation because I had a Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door, knock on the door, and I come and I'm busy on a computer right now. I'm busy working on my home space construction. But I said, Sunday morning, 9:30 coffee. And I told them exactly what we want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So Charles Taylor says there's 3 stages of secular. So this secularization happened in 3 waves, which I find interesting. The first one, over the last 500 years, he puts at, around 1776 and, 1800, where there started to be a separation of church and state. And we see that in the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, right? So now the state and religion become separated. But if you read the documents, because there is still so much God, there's a lot of God language, right? Because it was just so much part of the culture, right? So there starts to be this separation. And then what Charles Taylor says is secular 2 is where organized religion and denominations start to decline. Okay, so since World War II in Europe, and actually since World War I in Europe, participation in organized religion has greatly declined. In France, historically a very Catholic country, like 5% of French would go to church on Sunday. Okay, so as people became more educated and as wealth increased, religious affiliation declined in Europe. I think we're seeing that same trend happening here. Secular 2 has this question: how do we get people back in the church? It's concerned about the declining numbers and how do we get people back. Secular 3, he says, is actually where we're at now. And this is saying society no longer assumes that there is a God. The move from where belief in God is unchallenged and unproblematic to one in which it is understood of one option among others and frequently not the easiest to embrace. So our culture is saying, hey, you can believe that if you want. Don't put it on me, right? In fact, you're a little weird for believing that. Right? Does that make sense? So this is the thing that I think is really interesting. The main feature of Secular 3 is that it puts an end to the naive acknowledgement, basically, of God. It puts an end to naive faith. And so I go back to what this leader from years ago who said, I'm Catholic because my mama made me Catholic. In a sense, that's going, I'm doing this because that's what I was told to do. Right? And that's what culture does. This is what we do around here. But that, in a sense, that Catholic glue, Charles Taylor is saying, that's gone. Not totally gone, but by and large, culturally, the things that kept people Catholic is not the same as it was. It's changed. Make sense? Yes?
May I just add this? I grew up with a strong concept of a model sin, a venial sin, and the difference between the two, and it affected behavior. If there was not the correlation between belief and behavior, then it is of no worth.
I agree. Can I tell, I'll tell you a story about that in just a second. Yep, go ahead.
I happen to belong to a parish that is growing. And it's growing because we have a large African, a large Spanish, and a temporary mass kind of a mass. It's heavily black, and the kids go out to hear the gospel in their own fashion. And there are about 30 kids that go, and about 3 white kids. All the rest are black. Maybe a Vietnamese, maybe, but heavily black. They are seemingly keeping faith.
Right,
But
right.
we welcome them. That's what made the difference. We welcomed them 20 years ago.
So that is actually one of the huge strengths of Catholicism, is the universal nature of the church, right? And we sometimes get confused on that. Yes?
I've written down one thought that I feel compelled to say.
Cool.
Maybe we need to help people hold on to faith and a belief in God and not necessarily to be Catholic.
Maybe.
I think about parents with children and grandchildren. We would like them to be, but maybe they don't have to be Catholic. What we want, or what I want, I should say, I want my children and my descendants to have a belief in God, something more than themselves, and some faith in Him. Whether they're Catholic, Episcopalian, whatever religion
Right.
that they have.
That is such an honest response, but do any of you find that really sad? It's really, okay, but some do and some don't. But I mean, part of it is, like I grew up affiliated with Catholicism and a love of the church, and as a lay minister and as a theologian, teach about that. But for me, it becomes quite sad to hear that. And I have 3 children who aren't affiliating with the Catholic Church right now. 1 maybe, but 2 not. So, but that makes my heart break, but it's real.
Well, I think it's sad unless you think, as I do, I guess, that hopefully someday we will all be one church and the tent will be bigger and we won't have all these divisions.
Right. Okay. See, this is the kind of conversation I think that doesn't happen often enough. You know what I mean? To honestly say, hard things. I think that's really cool.
And I'm sitting here thinking, why would you feel that that's sad? I feel that that's joyful because I'm teaching them to have something more. And I'm just saying, I find that unusual that you think that that's sad because I don't see it.
Just let's poll the room. How many would feel sad about that? So look at, one of the things that I find fascinating is we don't provide enough space to understand the complexity of what's happening in our family and our different thoughts about this, right? And so, does anyone want to address the sadness that maybe you feel?
If I'm hearing you correctly, and I hope I am, I did not hear a mention of Jesus Christ. I heard a mention of some sort of religious or some sort of acknowledgement of God, and I want my kids to know and to love and to follow Jesus Christ. I might be sad that maybe they don't have the same Catholic experience growing up as I do, and I know they're not going to have that, but I want them to know Jesus Christ. And that, to me, is what's sad.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to date this, but I think it's 20 or more years ago. But I remember the prayer of Jesus in the Gospel of John, chapter 17. Father, that they may be one as we are one, that they may be one in us. And I remember believing that those words out of the mouth of Jesus were only about Catholics.
Yeah.
And I stopped believing that altogether. What it's about is one in Jesus, with its various and many expressions. And I tie that together with the best definition of the church I've ever heard in my life. Comes from a rather unique source, Jesus. That wherever 2 or 3 of you are gathered in my name, I am there with you in your midst, meaning in the power of the Spirit. And there was nothing, say this disrespectfully, I can't, but there was no statement about a pope or a cardinal or an archbishop or a bishop, much less a priest. Vatican II radically brought us back to understand that the primary definition of the church is the people of God, the baptized. What we're going through is the death of the institution of the Catholic Church, the hierarchical institution of the Catholic Church, which has had a very difficult time understanding that the most fundamental part of the church is the people, the baptized.
You've dedicated your life to this institutional church, right? So how many years have you been ordained? I mean, how many years ago? 50 years. So as a complete insider, as an ordained minister in the church, you're if I hear you correctly, you're also saying we have to think of the church. You want us to think about the church flowing out of Vatican II as the people. How do you deal with this sadness issue, or maybe you don't have a sadness?
No, I think it's double-sided. It's sadness and anger. The anger is first, and it's in the last. This will give you the full picture of me. My wife just said in our group that she's lost faith, trust. She's lost trust. Trust in the institution, in all of the reverence that we gave to our leaders. But that can be perceived as being an enormous catastrophe, unless, of course, it then allows us to see that what we're going through right now is a needed cleansing. It's a gigantic needed cleansing. cleansing, so that the Church of Jesus Christ can reemerge in the 21st century in a new Catholicism, in a new Protestantism.
Mhm.
And the Holy Spirit's running the show, and the state of Minnesota right now is 40%, no, it's right now it's 19% people of color. In 21 years, it's going to be 40% of people of color. And the Twin Cities will be 50% people of color. Most of those people are going to be brown. And they have their own characteristic faith. It's pretty basic. It's all about Jesus. And,
So we wanted, Donelle and I, in putting this together, to have honest conversation. But what strikes me is that honest conversation is hard. Listening is really hard because we come from different perspectives. But we chose this prayer that's actually this Paschal mystery, which is core, right? This life teaching of Jesus, death in the tomb, and resurrection. That's at the very center of Christianity. And what strikes me is that these conversations are challenging, and it's almost like they're tomb conversations. They're laments. And a lot of the time, we don't have much space for that. We want to jump to Easter. But I think this is a time for us actually to embrace the cross and to embrace the tomb and to be in that liminal space of waiting and anticipating, and as Donelle ended the prayer, and hoping. So that takes us to our break. I just thank everyone for your honest conversation. And I recognize, as the speaker here, the uncomfortability of that. Because as someone who was a lay ecclesial minister and someone who worked for the former bishop and someone who's a theologian, I feel I have a responsibility to also, really support Catholicism. Right? So when I say sad, I really mean that. But I also really mean we have to provide space to be honest with each other, and I think that's actually one of the strategies to move forward. So with that being said, let's take a break. We'll come back in 15 minutes.
So we're going to move forward. We've talked a lot about context in the first part of the morning. We've had some tomb conversations, for sure. And again, I think it's important, in light of the last 5 minutes of our discussion, to really be inspired by the journey of the cross as we move forward. That when we talk about hope, when we talk about strategies, that it's not without that journey of lament and of suffering, and that how do we incorporate that into our hope. And so we're going to, although Jeff and I work primarily with youth and young adults, and this is not exclusive to that age group, as we know that we each have a calling and to evangelize. And this is the strategy that has worked for us in our ministry to youth and young adults, and it's also a strategy that can work in your families, in your communities. And again, it's not just a strategy, but it's that relationship and that encounter with Jesus Christ. And so we know that our call to evangelize, to bring the good news of Jesus Christ, is first scriptural, that we hear, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. That we are given this imperative, that we're given this call to go out to the world, and that Jesus is with us until the end of the age. Pope Pius also says that bringing the good news of Jesus into every human situation and seeking the conversion of individuals in society to the power of the gospel is also a part of this evangelization and bringing to the world. And so this concept of missionary discipleship, we work a lot with fostering this discipleship. So it precurses kind of the vocational call, that we are each first and foremost called to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, a learner, which is at the root of the word, an apprentice, a student. And I would say that all of you coming here today to learn a few things as part of that discipleship. But again, we can't just keep it to ourselves, that there's a missionary call to this, to our relationship with Jesus, and how we live that out in the world. And so Pope Francis says that in virtue of our baptism, that all of the members of the people of God have become missionary disciples. It's not just up to the people that work at the church, that you yourself have this calling as well by virtue of your baptism, that we cannot be passive recipients of this. And so we need to become a culture of witness, somewhat talking about what Charles Taylor's is saying, what the culture is, that we have to embrace this culture of witness to the good news of God working in our lives today. And so we have a few strategies of how do we do this. That's great words, but how do we live this out? And my examples will be of youth and young adults, but I want you I invite you to think about how in your own life, in your own families, in your own communities, that you could really bring this forth. How many of you have ever seen 4- and 5-year-olds play soccer? Or any sport for that matter. I have 2 children, and when my 13-year-old started playing soccer, she would run out on the field. I should say run and then do a few cartwheels, and then run and do a few cartwheels. And then the ball would drop, and guess what would happen? Well, they'd stand there, but then they'd all run towards the ball. And then there would be an amoeba of running towards the ball again. And the coach would stand there and say, no, 3 need to be here and 2 need. Did that matter to them? No. Whee! Right? Pure joy, pure excitement. Did we start with the rules? No. You start with the encounter. This works so well. This goes so much farther of the love of the game and the love of God. When you start with the encounter of Jesus Christ. And that's what Jeff was talking about earlier, that the people just drift away. And it might be because that encounter hasn't happened for them. So the first part of our strategy, of our evangelization, is this beginning with the encounter. And to spread the gospel is not guaranteed either by the number of persons or the prestige of the institution or by the quantity of available resources. What counts is to be permeated by the love of Christ, to let oneself be led by the Holy Spirit, and to graft one's own life onto the tree of life, which is the Lord's cross. Begin with the experience of beauty and love in your life through your relationship with God. Anne Lamott says, I don't care about the hypostatic unity of the Trinity. I just want to give my life over to whoever made the redwoods, right? So just pause for a moment and think about, for you, can you remember or recall the time in your life where you have encountered God? You have encountered the beauty or the love of Jesus in your life. Just think about that. Just turn to your neighbor and just share one sentence about the time that you've experienced the love of God. It's an exercise in being concise. Go ahead. Okay. We could have a whole morning on just this, right? So part of it, the first part of this evangelization, and may I say that we only have, I'm going to bring out 4 parts of components of evangelization. Pope Francis has, and we have a lot of ways in which to evangelize. I'm just bringing out the ones that have worked for us and that can lead you and hopefully inspire you to do this in your own communities and for yourself. Part of the importance of this is not only to name it for yourself, but affirm and help others name it, those God experiences in their own life. So you don't have to be a leader in the church to do this. You can ask your children, you can ask your spouse, you can ask your community members. You can ask, the person on the plane perhaps. Who knows? Be brave, right? The second way to evangelize, and this is one of my favorites, is to do it so with joy. An evangelizer must never look like someone who's just come back from a funeral. And that's what Pope Francis says in The Joy of the Gospel. And we have found that it's contagious. Now, I'm not talking about happiness. Happiness is contingent on emotion and the situation. Joy is a much deeper feeling of, and again, embracing that journey of the cross, right? Embracing all that life gives you, to do so and to come forward with joy. And we see this with young people that in our ministry with young people is to recognize encounters with God in your life, to share it with others, and to do so with joy. And that's fully engaging and connecting with people. And so we need a church that is also brings forth the joy of this encounter. So again, sharing, thinking about ways in which, and again, this is hard given the context that we learned about this morning that we're living in, but also what are some ways in which we can share joy as well? And it's hearkening back to those encounters and experiences and drawing from that wellspring. The third part that I find an important part is that you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. I think you're looking at so this cartoon says, it guarantees me an entire seat all to myself on the bus. His t-shirt says, let's talk about Jesus, right? I posted this on Facebook and I got a lot of responses from my friends. And I think there's two ways in which I want to distinguish in this being uncomfortable. First is your own uncomfortableness, right? Of listening to some of the ways in which we embrace discipleship. So some things for me is go and do not sin again. Makes me uncomfortable. And I don't think we live in a culture that names sin anymore as sin, or there's fuzzy boundaries and lines around that, and we want to be nice, and we want people to like us. I mean, all of these things come into play. But this is one that makes me feel uncomfortable. But knowing that I have to do that. Unless you repent, you'll all likewise perish. That makes me feel uncomfortable. This one I find really difficult. If you wish to be complete, go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, follow me. There's a lot of excuses about money and wealth and I don't have that much, or I can't give this much, or my 2 children want iPhones. There's a lot of pressure here. But part of evangelization, part of spreading the good news is to really being uncomfortable. It's not necessarily a comfortable place, and there is some sacrifice involved in that. There's also a distinction here of not just your own internal personal, but how we go out and live. And Pope Francis says, I prefer a church which is bruised, hurting, and dirty because it's been out on the streets, rather than a church which is unhealthy from being confined and from clinging to its own security. I do not want a church concerned with being at the center, and which then ends by being caught up in a web of obsessions and procedures. So it's really directing us to go out and serve people in places that might make us uncomfortable. And that might not just be at your, I think our minds go to the homeless shelter. It might be at parish council, right? It might be in places that where people have poor of spirit too, that are not quite embracing your message. So part of this evangelization is that we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and what that means. And having conversations that respect one another, but also move us to a place where we can hear each other and listen. And I think the fourth one that has worked for young people and young adults in our ministry, but also can work in our families, is that it's essential that we work for peace and justice, that our message of the gospel is not certainly just our own personal piety, although important to work on, but how does it reflect the work for peace and justice? How do we go to direct service opportunities? How do we work for justice in our systems? How do we become closer to Christ through serving others? And not just in charity, but in justice as well. And I think that this is a constant. This is something that there's opportunities in our world today for this. We don't have to look very far to work for justice and for peace in our world. I want you to think about where in your families, where in your communities, that you can use some of these strategies. To begin with the encounter and the experiences, to talk with somebody. Give yourself one goal in the next month to maybe embrace one of the 4 of many, many strategies to evangelize. Maybe that is talking to somebody. Maybe that's, going outside your comfort zone. But to do so with joy. Maybe it's a conversation that somebody has about the election or politics, and to say, how am I reflecting the gospel in this conversation? I think something that's really a strategy that Pope Francis has just put forth is, as a good example, is the Synod of Bishops. How many of you have been following the Synod of Bishops on youth? Young people, the faith and vocational discernment. It just happened in October. And why I bring this up is because I think when we're talking about who will have faith, the young church is voicing some of these concerns in the context, and we're learning more about the context. And Pope Francis and the leaders of the church in the diocesan level have gathered information, and young people have come forward to say, this is what's on our minds, this is what's on our hearts. And so this whole process is kind of a strategy, I think, in terms of how we engage people in these conversations. Up here is just the timeline of what happened. I don't want to get too far into this, but basically in 2016, they announced the theme. This was the 15th Ordinary Synod. And then in January, there was a preparatory document is released with a bunch of questions for young adults. And then in March of 2018, there was a pre-synodal meeting of 300 youth and young adult delegates from around the world. And they released a document of all the themes. And then in June, the Synod responded with a working document, and it kind of set the tone for what the meeting would be. And that meeting took place in October. And so I want to just highlight some of the themes as part of the contextual context of where young people are at. Some of the themes that they said is that, now again, the 300 got 60,000 responses. And this is global. This isn't just the Western Church. This is the whole church. That they are seeking an authentic church. They are saying we need to be vulnerable. The church needs to be vulnerable, open, hospitable, inclusive, therefore authentic. This is the way that they want to see their church. How many of you feel that that's a necessary part of our church? Right, wisdom here. They also said they wanted a community or sense of belonging. And they're going to find a community, and it might not be the church. But they say this is their need, is that they need the sense of belonging for a community. And we know that as well, that time and time again, young people are seeking this. They want a place to belong, that are supportive, uplifting, honest, and accessible to them. Yes? Yes. Right, yeah, exactly. So again, and we'll talk about that more in process, but that, what are some of the ways, this is what they brought up, yeah. So they also brought up the place and role of women in church and society. And again, in this document, they weren't saying women must be priests, period. They were saying, please define and clarify for us the inequality. They want to have discussions. They want to have, what does this look like? And what is our role? They want to talk about the controversial subjects. They don't want to run from it. They want a community that will support and be honest about all of those that you see, and I'm sure much more as well. They want to participate in the church now. They don't want to wait till they're 40, which is old. No, I'm just kidding. I'm feeling that. I'm over that. But participation now in church leadership is important to them. And they have a desire for leaders and mentors. Some of the most important, the reason I've stayed for 25 years, one of the reasons is because I've had mentors that have loved me through a lot of the pain and the joys and the celebrations. And I think about that as a parent and saying, how am I accompanying my children in this story, in the church? So they desire leaders and mentors who acknowledge their humanity, admit mistakes, and seek forgiveness. And I bring this up because it's a navigational aid for us, I think, as a way forward into discussions to help us hope, to help us evangelize, to give us a format, to give us a structure to move forward, to have these conversations. And again, the response at the synod, the final document was in Italian, and I hate to tell you, I don't speak Italian or understand it. So I've had to look at the commentaries on it, but it was very positive in terms of opening up this discussion. And what I find hopeful is the actual process. The process is that Pope Francis is looking for a synodal process of discernment, of listening, and of accompanying, rather than here's what you should believe. But rather, let's talk about this. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so I just offer that as a way, a strategy, but more so a relationship, that beginning of that relationship, so that we may start to move in the hope and listening to the Spirit. And again, not coming up with the answers of who will have faith, but rather, how can we accompany people in this journey? Right?
So, who will have faith? Who will keep their microphone on? Come to me. Part of this question of who will have faith is, for us personally, where's your faith at? So we can be worried about everyone else, and maybe we are or maybe we aren't, but what about yourself? Where is your faith at? And I have two stories that I'd like to share with you, and then we'll take some lessons that we've been learning over the last 20 years with this Youth and Theology and Ministry program, and we'll just talk about the implications of that for who will have faith, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So when I think about my faith, I really think about what I was taught in Catholic school when I was a child, and what faith meant. So I remember first confession, what I was taught. And I have only a few stories, so if you've heard this before from me, it's like, well, it's my story. So I had Franciscan nuns from Rochester, St. John's Parish in Rochester, if you've ever been there. I was in second grade, and this is what I was taught. You have a milk bottle soul. And every time you sin, there's a black mark on that milk bottle soul. And remember, I'm in second grade, so I'm 7 years old. If you would die and you have a black milk bottle soul, you will go to hell and burn forever. My eyes were really big, contemplating hell forever as a 7-year-old. So let's analyze that. What did I conclude was the purpose of faith? I don't want to go to hell. Now, there's another assumption beneath this story that I think is really interesting. Faith was just about me and my soul and whether I went to heaven or not. It didn't have anything to do with us. It didn't have anything to do with the community. But one of the people who came up to me at the break said, well, we used to be really clear that there were expectations with faith, moral expectations. But it was really clear there were consequences to my behavior. But it took me actually a long time to recognize that I didn't have to just have a God who I had to fear was going to send me to hell. Right? So who will have faith? What does faith mean to you? As a small child, faith meant don't go to hell, for me. Now a second story, and I heard this from Ed Hayes when he was here 40 years ago. I was a student here. And I start out every summer institute when I give a talk for this Youth in Theology and Ministry program. I share this story with our high school students, our college students, and our grad students. And it's Ed Hayes' story. And it goes like this. There's a young person who wanted to figure out how do you sustain the journey of faith for the long haul. Because they were going, some people seem to have faith and then it just lasts for a little bit and then they leave. So this young aspirant goes to a desert monk and asks a question, how do you sustain faith for the long haul? And the monk in his little hut says, sit down, let me tell you a story. Which actually is the great way to teach, right? You always tell stories. So he said, look at my dog. See my dog there? Another hint. Good stories typically have dogs in them, you know. Unless you're a cat person, but I wouldn't recommend that. Okay, so one day, my dog's sitting here, and he sees a white rabbit hopping through the grass. And guess what my dog does? My dog tears after this white rabbit. And the rabbit is running around, jumping over trees and jumping over limbs. And then what? And my dog's barking. But guess what? All these other dogs in the neighborhood join in. So now you have a whole pack of dogs chasing, right? And they're all barking. But then the old monk says this, all the other dogs faded away, except for my dog. And then he stopped. And the young person went, that's your story of how to sustain my faith for the long haul? I don't get it. And the old monk says, well, you don't get it because you didn't ask the right question. Why did so many of the dogs drop out, but my dog kept chasing the white rabbit? And he said, and the answer to that question is the answer to how you sustain faith. And the young person thought, and then the monk said, my dog saw the white rabbit. My dog saw the white rabbit. Ed Hayes explains the story and says, if we don't have encounters with God, with Jesus, with the Holy Spirit in some way, this journey of faith is just too hard. Right?
Thank you. You put S on there. I made myself a note. Encounters, because oftentimes we look upon it and encounters and go through life. Encounters, you can have them every day.
So what's coming up a week from yesterday? Thanksgiving. A week from yesterday, that's right. Thanksgiving. Right? So do we think of seeing the white rabbit, of having encounters with God, with Christ the Spirit, with the Creator at Thanksgiving? You know, I think sometimes we forget this sacramentality of the church, that it is the stuff of life that reveals who God is. So my son talks to my wife more than he talks to me via text and Snapchat and all these other things, which are fine. But I was listening and talking to him, and he said, my wife asked, well, what kind of pie do you like for Thanksgiving? And my son said his wife really likes French silk pie, which actually he does. And then I said, well, we're going to have pecan pie, and then I think I'm going to make pumpkin pie. So I've never really made a pumpkin pie before. It can't be too hard, I hope. And so, but my son goes, well, won't you make this French silk pie? And I go, well, you're coming from Madison, Wisconsin. It might be a really nice gift for you to bring as part of the meal. And his honest to God response was, I'm bringing your grandchild. Do you not want me to bring your grandchild? So, back to the faith. Who will have faith? Do we connect these experiences of our family life to faith? So St. Teresa of Avila says, you know, you are the hands and feet of Christ. This is the incarnation. Ron Rolheiser, a theologian, says, if we stay connected to our family members, even if they've left the church, we're extending the hand of Jesus Christ to our children. He even goes so far to say they will never be lost as long as they're connected through us to the church and to Christ, which blows my mind away. I don't even really fully understand what that means. So think about it's a mashup of milk bottle soul to encounters with Jesus Christ, to family, right? Okay, so we just want to share a little bit about what we've been learning about what really works with evangelization and fostering faith. So we've been doing this Youth in Theology and Ministry program for 20 years, basically, and we bring high school people here for 2 summers, 2 weeks each summer. We do something really crazy. We engage them with college-level theology as high school people. And guess what? They love it. We have them do community service. So they go out into St. Cloud and do service all afternoon. We teach them a variety of Christian Catholic prayer. They're there for 2 weeks. They go back to their parish and do a project that they lead for service and justice. They come back for 2 more weeks the second summer. over those 20 years, guess what the number one thing young people have said through all the 20 years that has the most meaning for them? A sense of community. A sense of community. Over and over again, and we've started using the language of beloved community. So what we've discovered is that what works in fostering Christian discipleship is first and foremost an experience where people are accepted and belong. And you know what? That has huge lessons for us adults. We live in such a polarized country right now, not just politically, but also in the church. How do we foster experiences where we belong to each other? How do we foster relationships with each other? And you know, it's challenging. But my point is this. If we want to evangelize, then we need to think about starting in our families and then moving out. How do we foster a sense of you are beloved just as you are? So my son, even though he's not going to bring us French silk pie, is beloved just as he is. My wife said this morning, "You've been grumpy all week." And I go, "Really?" Another feeling I'm not aware of. But what I love most about my wife is she tells the truth. And so I was thinking, why have I been grumpy and all of this? And then I think, how do I not bring that to Thanksgiving? You know what I mean? All right. Too much about me. It's like, right. That is a great question. How do you not? I think this session actually had 2 points to that. One, on one hand, so there's kind of a dilemma here. On one hand, we want to have honest conversation. So to not be afraid of that. And the other hand is just, I love you just the way you are. And living in that tension, so it's maybe both and, which is a really good Catholic answer, right? But I don't think there's a clear description or prescription of exactly how anyone does that in their context. But it's a great question, isn't it?
Because if you're trying to love him for who he is, then you've also got to believe that you're going to be loved just as you are, even if you're grumpy, right?
Well, if I wait to be loved just as I am, it's going to be a long wait. But that's, yeah. You laugh because you live in this too, right? Okay. So just the other lesson we've learned, and I think it's from the young church, but it's for all of us also, and that is we started to raise the bar. You know, just think about expectations. What's expected out of a Catholic these days? Virtually nothing. I mean, when I was growing up, there were really pretty high expectations. What we've learned through the Youth in Theology and Ministry program, we challenge the young people to go back to their parish and do like a service justice project that they're going to lead. And we're just astounded. We're just astounded by what they do. They do much more than we would ever expect. So we have Sergio from Cold Spring, who came. He was like 15 years old. And he's visiting homes with the pastor of Latino families. And guess what? He's saying, I want to start a Bible study with Latino youth and Latino parents so that we can study the Bible together in Cold Spring. 15 years old. Paul Harvey, the rest of the story, right? So the story doesn't end there. So he's going, we don't have any Bible study materials in Spanish in our parish. He calls, 15-year-old, he calls up St. Mary's Press in Winona. It says, I'm 15 years old. I want to start a Bible study with youth and parents in my parish, and I don't have any materials. Can you send some to me? And I don't have any money, so I want them for free. Honest, the person we know at St. Mary's Press talks to Donelle in the cities and tells her this story. Raise the bar. Raise the bar. What expectations do we have? That's been such a huge, huge issue. Yes?
We had conversations earlier and talking about children, particularly grandchildren, and you just put an interesting thought in my mind. I have a 16-year-old granddaughter that I'm going to suggest and I'll offer to fund it as a scholarship to come for the 2-week theology experience.
Absolutely.
Children here, that parents of children here, do the same thing. That would be a wonderful way to evolve.
There's our executive summary. I have some copies back on that back table by the plants there. If any of you want to hear more about it or talk to Donelle or I about this, we do a lot of research and evaluations with this. So our group last year that finished the 2 summers program, we asked them, do you consider yourself a Christian disciple? And at the end of the 2-summer program, every single youth said, yeah, I'm a Christian disciple. Which is amazing, isn't it? That they, so I want to go back to that going, gone issue with millennials, where you get a chip and then it breaks into a crack. There's something else that can happen. You can have experiences of God that is a balm. You can have experiences of beloved community that's a healing balm for your soul to say, no, this I believe. I see these young people leave YTM and they're going, I want to change the world because of my faith in Jesus Christ.
You can say, I believe, but also, these are my people. And that's what will help us sustain.
Right. And one other thing, they have a clear vision of the mission of the church, which at YTM we use Catholic social teaching. And every 2 years, we focus on the dignity of the human person and then on care for creation of the two themes that we deal with. Okay, so we have, I think it actually might be helpful for you to just see a video of just, go back. The third lesson was a holistic curriculum, which includes the mind, the heart, and the hands, which is really essential. So it's not just an intellectual endeavor. I want to just share this thought about youth ministry in general in Catholic circles. Is Catholic youth ministry is very good at bringing youth to retreats and summer conferences, and many times it gives them a spiritual high. But then it's like they crash. And then a year goes by and we give them a spiritual high and they crash. And one of the things that we've discovered at YTM is that the role of theology and engaging young people in thinking theologically about the big questions of life really helps to not move it to be episodic, but to sustain Christian discipleship over time. Just our research says that 20% of the youth who attend YTM go on to study theology in college, as these are majors or minors, which is, I mean, who studies theology? Okay, I want to show you this, and we've got feedback that this sounds like an advertisement from our previous evaluations of doing this, and maybe it is, but it's not meant to be primarily that. Watch the joy that you see in these faces. Listen to their words, but just see what's going on here. All right, let's see if this works.
Who should come to YTM?
Everybody.
Everybody should have a taste of YTM.
I should come to YTM because the community and just of how much you learn.
Anybody that is in the least interested in their faith.
Everybody should have this opportunity to meet new people and grow in their faith.
I think someone should come to YTM if they're looking to deepen their relationship with Christ, learn more ways to pray, and just want to bring back a beloved community to where they're from.
St. John's campus is really beautiful. There's a sense of peace that really allows me to focus on what it is that I'm doing. It's very freeing. Going to morning prayer with the monks has been a really incredible way to start my day. Having their presence, contributing to the campus environment is really incredible.
St. John's is an amazing campus, and walking around at this camp and just seeing monks out and about and seeing sisters every once in a while, it's just a really different atmosphere. But also just being on campus, it really fosters a sense of learning and a hunger for growth in theology, but also just in our faith.
The classes we take have really opened my eyes and made me open to thinking for myself.
I think mostly that it's okay to ask questions is something that has been a huge standout for me in the classes, but also just in Theologian of the Day and other programs that we have.
YTM is a place with a great community.
The people at YTM have been amazing. I've gotten to meet a lot of really wonderful people.
In this community, everybody is so nice and welcoming. Everybody is just amazing. I see God in everybody's faces.
I've never been in a community where everyone's so loving. I was it was really weird at first to be with some people that are so loving. I see God in just the community that we're in.
I've never met so many young people so passionate about not only their faith in God, but for each other and fostering the love of God between each other.
Well, the community is fantastic, and I've met so many incredible friends that I will keep in touch with for hopefully the rest of my life.
Did you see the joy? Now, sometimes we think youth programs are something that just youth do, but there's lessons here for us adults. How do we engage in groups where we're learning like this? But how do we have time to really pray and talk about our questions together? How do we have time to serve together? And I think that's part of it. Youth aren't seeing us as a community that way. But I think, as Father Tony said, it's not going to just be top down. It has to be from us. It has to be rise up. So we have the last 10 minutes for conversation, and Donelle's going to lead this, but I actually want to take a little bit of your time, and we'll be done in 10 minutes. There's 3 people in the back of the room that I would really love to hear your responses to today. So we have a relatively young priest. We have a pretty new youth minister, Kelly, and then we have a pretty new vowed religious. One of the things I love is to listen to young people, and you're not young, but you're still, in this group, you're pretty young. And obviously, if you don't want to say anything, you don't have to, but how many of you would like to hear from people who are dedicating their lives to the church, kind of their response to what's happened here? Me too. All right. Oh.
Now we can hear. There we go. One of the prerequisites to be ordained, I feel, is to have a basic working knowledge of how these things work. Sometimes we get it right. Anyway, reactions from the day. I think Listening to everything, watching the video, I think the encounter is really, really important. I see that, and the community, we've been talking about that at our parish. Elizabeth and Michaela here work at Our Lady of Peace, where I am the pastor, and they get, they would I don't know if they would say they get sick of hearing me talk about the importance of community and relationship and hospitality, but I do talk about it a lot because sometimes the means to, I think, the encounter with Christ, which is so important, the means to that is, as we've been talking about, encounter with other people. And you have to have a bridge of trust with other people in the church and Christians who say they follow Christ before people will be willing to encounter or have that encounter sometimes with Christ himself. So I think that's really important. And I always feel that, the milk bottle story is fascinating to me, because I think the reason it was fascinating to me, and the thing that came immediately to mind, is that on the other hand, there are people, like there was a very active young mother in our parish, and they moved away, unfortunately, because of work. But part of what brought her to that encounter with Christ was realizing that, there is a point where we're going to have to give an account of our lives. Now, I think the difference is, if you're just hearing about milk bottle and the black stains, then yes, that's not, it lends to fear, it lends itself to not having that correct understanding with God. But somehow she got that, and she got it balanced with the encounter. And it was a powerful motivation for her. And so that's really stuck with me. So I think the encounter is important. I think on a certain level, some of those aspects of the expectation, not just the expectation to reach out and start Bible study and all of that, that's fascinating and important, and I see that in our youth as well. But some of the expectations that are perhaps more of what we would have heard in the past, but presented maybe in a different way that has that element of relationship with Christ. I see that youth are hungry for that. So just a few thoughts real
That's
briefly.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Kelly.
do I just pass it down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi. So I'm Kelly Daschler. I work at Christ the King Church in South Minneapolis. I'm a student of the School of Theology here, and I'm part of the what they call the YTM cohort. So most of us in that cohort work in ministry roles. We bring students up to that camp that you saw the video on, and then we kind of focus on this question of what do we do in ministry? How do we bring these ideas to where we work in our communities? So I guess the biggest thing that I'm taking from today and my studies and things here, yes, that encounter. I think that's one thing that I try to lead my ministries with. But with that kind of a context of relational ministry. So part of what you brought up there too, that it's not just allowing space for encounters with God and prayer and whatever that may look like, but it's being in relationship with one another. And part of that, a big part of that and a challenge sometimes for me is listening. So that idea that I'm not the one that should always be teaching, that we have wisdom in our group, that our young people have so much wisdom if we just allow that. And two, I also lead so I'm a director of faith formation, so I work with little kids all the way through adults. And so I also lead a Bible study in the morning with primarily older adults that are in their 70s and 80s. And so oftentimes they'll ask me questions and expect me to have the answer, and I might not. And often I'll just say, well, what do you think? And then oftentimes almost everybody else has an answer or something to say about that. So so I think just leading with other questions, being a person that can be in relationship with one another, and that idea of being a mentor too, that we're all on the journey together, no matter what our age or beliefs are. So.
I'm Sister Bridget, and this is a little bit of a ad for YTM because I was in the second summer of YTM. And so I guess I'm just really blown away by the thought of beloved community, because I've felt it and experienced it, both at YTM and then further in the monastic community at St. Ben's. And so I really, it's really, today actually, really made me think, well, how do I do that in the classroom that I'll be teaching in the spring? So I'll be teaching Theology 111 to the college students. And so how can I bring that to the students? How can I bring that sense of beloved community to the students so that they can bring that out of the classroom too? So that's something that I really, really am going to reflect on and hopefully implement into my classroom in the spring. So that's wonderful.
I just want to say, I realized as the microphone was heading my way that I was so focused on what I was going to say that I didn't even introduce myself, and the other two did. So I'm Father Joa Ellis. I'm a priest at Our Lady of Peace in South Minneapolis, not that far from Christ the King. I'm actually a priest of the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, so please forgive me, Bishop. But yes, but I never grew up here. My family lives in the St. Cloud Diocese, but they argue with me about this all the time. But sorry for not introducing myself.
Thank you.
So in closing, yes, please.
I just thought it'd be helpful. Yesterday, or last night, late last night, I came back from the bishops' meeting in Baltimore. Interesting. Today I'm with this group. Tomorrow I'm with the Diocesan Pastoral Council, which is all lay people and religious. We talk about all of this, where we are. Two reactions. First of all, lay people are going to be involved in a better way, in a greater way, in accountability of bishops in the church. That's a given. Didn't hear anybody talk about that at the bishops' meeting against that. So, and then the clericalism thing, which I'm a part of, is not good. And we are trying to work on that as best we can. So, see in all of this an attempt to try to grow through and to be apologetic for and to change the lack of accountability and the lack of involvement of lay people. That's going to change. And it's going to do better. It's going to take a little bit longer. It's so darn complicated. You can't. We had 225 bishops there, and we had 225 opinions. So, but that and the accountability, and then the clericalism, we got to get rid of that. That status thing or something, whatever the clergy has and the bishops have, it's destructive. So we'll work on those two things and please be patient. I like to say, people ask me, I always get in trouble because they'll say to me, it's not your church, Bishop, it's our church. And then I have to say back to them, well, it's not your church either, it's God's church. And until we keep that focus, we get lost, us and they. So that's where we are. And it's always a good. I come here to these things not because well, first of all, come to show support for it, but secondly, to come to learn myself. And I do that all the time.
Thank you.
So in closing, yes.
I just want to say along with what Nick said, I got a very warm response from the pastor of my church when I actually wrote him a note and said, I'm glad to be here.
Mm. All right, thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So in closing, we're asking you to reflect, be challenged, invite you into this question. What type of commitment are you willing to make to foster faith in your own life and in your community? When we allow and invite this encounter with Jesus to affect our lives and to be our compass, It changes us, as we've heard from so many of you, and evidence of our ministry. And just like Mary standing at the tomb, she casts her fear aside and trusts in the relationship she has with Jesus. And Jesus calls us to speak and live this message in our world, in our time, in our communities with compassion and courage. So thank you today for your compassion, your courage in having this conversation. And we thank the School of Theology, the Development Office, for allowing us to have this space and time to do that. Blessings to you.
Thank you, Jeff and Donelle. It was a wonderful presentation. Appreciate it, as I know all of you do. So as they're getting our food ready, which makes me a little nervous because I knew that they weren't coming with food. Hello, food. Eventually they'll get here. So in continuous pursuit of its Catholic mission, many of you know the School of Theology and Seminary is about educating, but not only educating, but forming Christian disciples to go out and be the leaders in our communities who will be drawing out those gifts in our faith communities, not telling and speaking, but like we just talked about, being community and listening also. I'm going to do something a little different today. For those of you who hear me all the time, I'm just rattling off things. I kind of thought it might be kind of fun just to do facts today. And sometimes it's easier to remember facts, and maybe not. So founded in 1857, St. John's was established to educate the young men to be priests. That was the original intent when our forefather came to St. John's. However, today, we're preparing not only the ordained, but the laity here at the School of Theology and Seminary into professional positions, working at our Catholic charities organizations. They're working in our Catholic schools, our missionaries around the world, homeless shelters. They're in nursing homes. They're in prisons. There are spiritual directors, and there are chaplains in the hospitals. And I always get that look of surprise, like, what do you mean chaplains, Grace? Those are the priests. Well, in its history, it was the priests who were our chaplains, but times have changed, and the laity and those getting trained here, a lot of them are going into chaplaincy. In fact, St. Cloud Hospital, I think, is all of ours. We are one of 4 Catholic theological schools in the upper Midwest. Our student body is not just Catholic. A lot of people are always surprised when I tell them that. Yes, the majority of them are Catholic, but there are many denominations that come here to train underneath the Catholic and Benedictine traditions and practices. They love what we do, and they want to bring what we do, learn what they learn here into their lives and into their denominations. Each year we have a very vibrant student body of 100 students here, both part-time and full-time. 8 to 10 different countries represented. Some are from China, Japan, Korea, Austria, Australia, Canada, and the list goes on. So it's quite diverse at the School of Theology. We were the first to establish the permanent diaconate program. And the St. Cloud Diocese sends all of their diaconate candidates through the School of Theology for their training. We are, for as far as we can see, the first to offer theological degrees to women. So that's a good plus for us, right? And the first to engage in ecumenical dialogue. I'm going to end my list of facts with this great quote from a friend of the school, Father Andrew Greasley. Maybe some of you know who he is. He was quoted saying this that I think sums up the school very well. St. John's is special, probably the most special single institution in the American Catholic Church, a center for social action, scholarship, ecumenism, and liturgical renewal. In the case of the last two, it is fair to say that they both began at St. John's, and of the last three that continue to flourish at St. John's, even though they are in retreat in most of the rest of American Catholicism. So a big thank you to all of you who support the school already, and we invite those of you who may have been thinking about it in the past or do not support us at this point to please give some prayer and thought to supporting the school for the continuation of creating or training and preparing our leaders out in the church, especially our youth. So thank you for coming. We hope you enjoyed the day. There's a lot more information in your packets. I'm not going to go through that. You can take it home with you.